So hello everyone, welcome to NouTalks. In this first episode, I am joined by Noor Mohammed, who's a very good friend of mine. She's 26 years old from Bahrain. Noor graduated actually from Bahrain Polytechnic, co-founded and managed the operations of a cargo company, then left to work for a leading regional food delivery platform in their sales department before moving to the United States just this year, which is actually funny because that's where Noor and I met for the first time. We've been part of a leadership program called the MEPI Student Leaders Program, where we spent the summer in 2017 together. That's a story I think Noor is going to tell you more about. I'd like to start by asking you about your background. If you could tell us which city you grew up in and where did you go to school in Bahrain?
It's called Bahrain Polytechnic.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a practical university, and it's very different from the traditional learning that people were used to in Bahrain. Like when I joined it didn't have any graduates yet, so they didn't have any alumni, so they didn't know. There was a lot of uncertainty about that university, and that was back in 2012.
Yeah.
And so like a lot of people were like, oh, we don't know if you're going to be employable and everything, but I really believed in that school because I knew a couple of people who went there. My major was it's international logistics management.
Good.
And it's like very different than what I do now because it's all about like global shipping and like moving cargo from point A to point B. And it was like the knowledge that I obtained from that degree definitely helped me with like working. But you know when you study something is different than when you work it, and I loved that major. Like I owe my career to it because it's not just the major itself, it was the culture of that, like of the logistics school and Polytechnic. So it was a lot of things that just made me who I am today. So I would definitely say that having the right education and the right environment, and that like from the age of 18 to 22, 23 is really important because that's when you start exploring and understanding yourself.
Yeah, well, that's so great. And your school basically was in the city you grew up in?
Well, Bahrain is initially a small city, so it's not like you move out of the city or something. Because Bahrain, if you know anything about it, it's like you literally move from one area to another in 15 minutes. So the school was not that far away from me. It was like 20 minutes away from me. With traffic, it can be 35 to 40 minutes.
Okay.
But it depends on when my classes were.
Yeah, it's actually funny you say that because I myself didn't know a lot, like at all about Bahrain. And when I met you, you started telling me a bit about it. So if there are people listening to us who don't know a lot about Bahrain, how could you describe it?
I would say it's a very small but diverse island. You'll meet a lot of nationalities there, and there's a diversity of food. There's a diversity of population, so there's a diversity of food. The food there is really good.
Did you have like a Bahraini dish that's your favorite, for example?
The safi. It's a small like fried fish, and it's a specific kind of fish. And it's like very well known. It's very popular, and I don't like fish, but this fish is like, it's like, especially when it's like homemade, it's so yummy. It's like a traditional thing for people to have it every weekend, like every Friday. And we were one of those households would have safi every Friday. Like if I woke up on a Friday and there was no safi, I'd be so disappointed.
Really? It's like couscous from Morocco. Like couscous is like a Friday thing.
Yes.
Is it a bit like that? Okay. So you were telling me about how Polytechnic was kind of a defining part of your life and how it helped you so much get your job and everything. But could you tell me though about your first jobs? Like, what did you do like after school? Directly? Did you get a job directly, or how did that experience go for you?
So from the age of 19, I was volunteering a lot, and the kind of volunteering that I was doing was very practical, kind of volunteering that would prepare you for working in a corporate. So there's like organizations that do that. I think like Injaz and Isaac. You know Injaz because like you've
I
worked
do,
in Injaz.
yeah.
I never participated in Injaz, even though it was like something I wanted to do, but I knew what they did.
Yeah.
But I was definitely active in Isaac, and Isaac definitely made me such a good like employee, or like very prepared for the work, for the workplace, in addition of my degree. So it was kind of like working, but I was really volunteering. And then like after like working in Isaac for a year, I was able to land my first job through the connections that I made in Isaac. And like that's when like job opportunities were much easier, because that's how I
Yeah.
built up my experience. Like I worked, I think, 3 jobs and an internship, um, from the age of like
Wow.
19 to 22 before I graduated.
How did you manage to be in two associations, start a, co-found a company?
The company that I started was after I graduated, so I
Yeah.
wasn't like doing any school. But
Yeah.
when I was studying, I was working part time, and I would say it's all about time management.
Yeah.
And I'm the kind of person who's much more focused when I'm multitasking. So like when I have one thing to focus on, I get really
Yeah.
bored and then I don't do it well. But if I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I have to do this, so that I can like, because I have like if I have a specific timeline to do specific tasks, I'm like way more efficient and focused on them. But when I have the whole day, I just get bored and I just slack and stuff. Being a part-time worker made me a better student, and having the knowledge that I had in university also helped me with my work.
Okay. Well, I completely understand that, especially that since I was running a startup and was in business school at the same time. So I completely get you. It's just that for me in Morocco, and I think I already told you about this, but business school in Morocco was a bit tight on schedule. We had like a lot of classes. We didn't have a lot of free time, and we had lots of work. So it kind of consumed a lot of my time.
So in Bahrain Polytechnic, because it's more practical, we do exams and presentations and assignments and quizzes. So we have all of that. So we're very packed. But because
Okay.
there's so much workload, they give us only 4 subjects.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
that's not much at all. I had about like 10 per semester. That's insane.
Yeah, so that's what I was saying. That's what they do. Like it's 4 subjects, but like there's
Yeah.
so much work within the subject, because you do
Okay.
exams and presentations. It's like practical work and studying. So
Yeah.
from the outside, it looks like it's easy, but like we're like working 24/7. So for me, what I did was I took 3 subjects when I was working, so that I can manage. Because if I took 4 subjects and I was working full time, I would have not been able to manage. But that really
Yeah.
helped my GPA, because I was like, my GPA got better when I was like taking 3 and working,
Yeah.
because it was very healthy for me to multitask and
Mm.
to have my mind in 2 different places. But when I'm in class, I'm like focused on class, because I know this time is really valuable and this is the most
Mm.
time I'll need. And then when I go out of
Yeah.
class and I have 2 hours, I know that I need to study in these 2 hours, instead of having 5 hours, but I'm like procrastinating for an hour and a half
Yeah.
and then eating for like we do that as students.
Yeah. I completely get you. It's just like when once you organize your day by time slots, you kind of have to stick to it and you become more productive, which I completely get. And it actually leads me to my other question, which is, are opportunities to be a part-time student and to find associations like easy in Bahrain, or you have to know people and network a lot, or like your school actually has connections with associations?
Well, Bahrain Polytechnic, they do have an career employment center, so they do help you understand how you can present yourself in an interview. And we have these
Mm-hmm.
resources at the university. From the age of 19 to the age of 23, I probably went through maybe 11 interviews, and I only got 3 or 4 jobs out of these
Okay.
interviews. You shouldn't be intimidated. So it was just all about building my confidence and understanding how. So for example, like understanding if I have a certain person that I met, I consider that person as an asset for me. So for example, if I met a manager, for example, in a company, one of the things that I would do is I provide value for them, and then in return I could get a job. Understanding how networking works and understanding how you can utilize whatever opportunity you get when you meet one person or two, and that could open up opportunities. But my jobs, it was just like a lot of them that I got was just me applying and getting them. But I was definitely a person that networked a lot, and that helped my soft skill when I represented myself in interviews.
Yeah, that's really, really good. And I think a lot of youth nowadays, especially in like the Arab world, do not necessarily network a lot, and they
Mm-hmm.
don't go out there and attend events and seminars and be part of associations. And I think that's really, really important. It
Mm-hmm.
builds a lot the skills of the person and helps them get opportunities. And I just wanted to ask if you could give one advice to students right now who are not part of associations, or they're just stuck with schoolwork.
I think it goes down to what everyone wants. So I don't think, in my opinion, it should be done a certain way. Like it worked for me to work and study at the same time. I know a lot of people who graduated without any prior experience, regretted that. But for some people, maybe it doesn't work for them because some people are still getting to know themselves and they don't know what they want. So I think it's all about trying to understand what they want.
Yeah.
I do believe that going into NGOs and associations and organizations helps you go that way, but that's not the only way. It's one way, right? So I think
Yeah.
it's always understanding what makes you feel comfortable, because it's such an extroverted thing to do that. And I understand that I have a lot of friends who don't feel comfortable doing that. They don't feel
Hmm.
comfortable putting themselves out there because they're more introverted. So if you're introverted and you don't feel comfortable going into these associations and putting yourself out there, maybe you should still find something that you could do at home that could still help you get a soft skill. There's online courses that you can buy. There's
Hmm.
you can start a blog. There's a lot of ways to do things online, but I think just finding these resources is important, and just being true to yourself. I was being true to myself when I was in these organizations. When it didn't make sense to me, I left. And
Yeah.
so with the startup, when I felt like the startup didn't make sense to me, I left. So it's all about trying to understand what works for you.
Is Did you find it difficult as a woman to do so much? Because honestly, like, I have this idea, and I think everybody does, that in the Middle East it's more difficult for you as a woman to network. Is that an issue in Bahrain or not, or is it just stereotype?
I think networking and getting to talk to people, and I don't know about the rest of the Middle East. I can talk from my own experience. I don't think that stereotype doesn't exist anywhere. It exists in the United States. It exists in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
It exists in Asia for women all
Mm-hmm.
over the world. I think it's different, and it's layered differently depending on your economic and racial background. So
Yeah.
every person might not everyone might understand that, like some of the things that they're dealing with has to do with discrimination. A lot of people, sometimes a lot of women, talk to me about certain experience, and in my head I'm always like, oh, this person is like definitely discriminating against you for your gender, but they don't know that. So for
Yeah.
me, to answer your question, I because I wear the traditional hijab thing, I did feel some kind of condescendingness coming from people, and
Mm-hmm.
the way that I dealt with it was just the way that I presented myself. So when I present myself in a certain demeanor, and this is
Yeah.
something that I learned in MEPI, right? If you
Oh,
remember,
yeah.
when they told you, like when Dr. Tracy mentioned that, the way that you present yourself affects the way that you feel about yourself, and then the way that people feel about you.
Okay.
That helped me a lot. So I made sure that when I talk, I'm always like, I focus on my self-confidence and my body language, and
Mm-hmm.
that really helped me deal with people who were challenged by me being able to speak up, or me being able to have a certain opinion about something. It was always about my body language, and it was just
Yeah.
about dealing with the situation in that moment. But I
Yeah.
definitely felt some discrimination, and in Bahrain in general, and that's just my opinion, some people might agree, might disagree. A lot of times when they see that you have the hijab on, they think that, oh, like, she is not open-minded, or she is, like, whatever, sheltered or whatever. And when
Mm.
you don't wear the hijab, they're a little bit more open to hearing you out, a little bit more. it
Yeah.
presents its own challenges, because sometimes they think of you just as a pretty thing or whatever, but it just being wearing the hijab, sometimes people don't expect much from you. So each like image presents its own challenge, but I think it's just like I said, it's all about presenting yourself. Eventually it helps if the person that you're dealing with is more or less civilized.
That was some really good advice. Seriously. I think it's really important as well to just value yourself for who you are and just be confident about what you have to offer and what you have to say. And I just wanted to know if you could tell us a bit your background story of when you got your job, or a situation that you've lived in which you've actually been discriminated.
So when I was one of the reasons I left the startup that I founded was that the two founding partners were men, and they were like 15 years older than me. And one of
Mhm.
them was really supportive, like the initial founder, the first person who like had like the investment and all that stuff. He was way more civilized, and he would like hear me out, and we'd have constant conversations about where to take the business. My relationship with him presented some sort of like challenge, because I wanted to take more action, that like he had the more power because like he had the funding. So a lot of times I wanted to take action, but he would always like, no, let's wait. So the challenge for him was just to give me more authority in taking decisions, and like I was never given that. And that was something that I always struggled with. And that's like, after a year I realized that that's not good enough for me. But it was, the conversations that him and I would have would still keep me around, because he would still listen to my opinion. He would always tell me what I thought. But the other guy the other founder who came after me, was very challenged, and he came from a very traditional, like a very like Uber background, urban
Mhm.
background, and he was very challenged by my ability to talk and present myself, and just little things that like blew my mind, that someone
Wow.
has not been exposed to, like a woman in her 20s who was able to just stand and be able to present herself. And we would have so many arguments, and it was really exhausting. And I felt at some place I didn't want to be in a place where I had to fight to be heard. So I aimed for a company that valued my opinion and valued my ability to present myself and to develop myself, regardless of my position. So for
Mm.
me, the discrimination came from just in your face, you're a woman, just be quiet and listen to us men talk. It was as blunt as that. Like the
Wow.
message was very clear, and it
Mhm.
blew my mind. Like all of these things that I would read about and all that, like I was experiencing it, and I thought I would experience it like later on in my career when I'm like a manager or something. But I was experiencing it from a very young and early on stage, and it just gave me exposure. It gave me growth. It allowed me, like it made me understand that, okay, if you deal with someone like that, what do you do? Do you
Mhm.
like do you try to argue, or like right now, if I met someone like him, I will not even bother trying to talk to him, because the kind of person that I dealt with was someone who wouldn't even want to listen to me. He wanted me just to not exist. Literally, he would always be like, no, you should like listen to me first, blah blah blah. So that was
Wow.
like very difficult
Mm.
for me to deal with, because I've never had that kind of like bluntness in terms of sexism.
I just want to understand. So your position, to face this kind of discrimination is to actually just leave it because for you it was a toxic work environment, and you decided that that's not the place you want to be, right?
So the thing is, because I would like talk to my friend and my partner, the guy who founded the company, and he would always like take everything that the other guy did with like he would just kind of brush it off. He would give him excuses, and he'd be like,
Mm.
no, he means well. He didn't see what I was talking about. He was not always in the office when that would happen, because he had another job. Both of us were mostly full timers in that job. So he didn't understand my frustration, but also he was not a woman. So he wouldn't know what I'm talking about. He didn't experience what
Yeah.
I experienced. But like the other guy, like I'm not in touch with him because he's just not relevant to me. And to answer your question, was it better to leave? Yes, it was better to leave, because it was toxic. It did reach to the point where it was toxic and exhausting. And also because I was not growing professionally, because I was so caught up with trying to get that guy to listen to me that I was like not
Yeah.
working. So it's just not healthy. So I was like, okay, let me just like find something that will help me grow.
I have this question that I have to get it out. But did you face that person who discriminated you about the subject?
I don't remember. I'm pretty sure that I would bluntly tell him, I don't remember what, but I would argue with him about things, disagree with him about things,
Mm-hmm.
but he would just have his way and like manipulating the situation to benefit him. And because they're both older than me and they're both men, so they kind of I guess worked with each other better than the other guy worked with me, or understood each
Yeah.
other more. Even though like I predicted a couple of things that would happen in the company like 6 months before it happened, but I was never taken seriously, and then it happened. So
Yeah.
like I told them like, hey, we're running out of finances in this department, we need to focus on this. Like I predicted some things, I was not heard, and then when
Mm-hmm.
it did happen, I was like, okay, I'm not even being heard and I see consequences, so why should I?
If you could give advice to people that today are faced with discrimination, especially now in the Arab world, what kind of advice would you give them?
So I don't think we're gonna. Sadly, it's the truth. I don't think we're gonna reach a place of equality in the corporate world until maybe 100 more years. That's what the United Nations estimates, 80 to 100 years. So I think for my generation, I would ask women to just get into startups or start one or start their own companies or just start initiatives that empowers them
Mhm.
and focus on things that makes them a better person and grows their skill. If they do choose to stay in the corporate world, it's going to be a challenging one because globally the corporate world is male dominated and it's not always easy to climb up the ladder or
Yeah.
whatever. And like I've become way more radical in my views when it comes to being a corporate feminist, because I started understanding that there's way more um, just it's the fact that it's so male dominated is just very much against us, because having women in who are managers in the industry, as much as it's improving, it's still not enough. So in my opinion, we have to aim for these roles very aggressively, and the way that we do it is by having prior experience before we even go to the corporate world, whether it's startups or initiatives or whatever. So I would always put something on, on our plate, just so that we have a head start. And
Mhm.
for men, I would just say listen to women. The biggest challenge I was they would never listen. And actually, in the company that I worked in before, like we had a focus group where women talked about their experiences, and the men couldn't have it. They kept like denying our experiences, and they kept saying we don't see it that way, even though it's not their experience, it's ours. So men, especially in the Middle East, they really struggle to listen to women. And that's, I believe, this is our biggest challenge, being heard in the Middle East. If we would overcome that, I think a lot of things would improve.
I completely agree with you that women need to, acknowledge discrimination when it's there. I think that's the first thing, right? They have
Mm-hmm.
to see it clearly and say, hey, I am discriminated and I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to voice that out. And I think it's very important to voice it out. And absolutely, people need to listen more to each other, either like even women to women. I think it's really important.
Well, the thing is, understanding discrimination as a woman, you have to understand what's going on around you.
Yeah.
Like, for me, from a very young age, because I have, a brother who's older than me and a brother who's younger than me, I always knew that the world didn't treat men and women equally. Just because I had two
Really?
brothers, it was very crystal clear for me, but I'm a very observant person. I would say for women, it's all about knowledge. It's about understanding what's going on, and it's just about being realistic. And it's hard sometimes when you're in the situation. It's hard to be realistic about what's going on, because the more you know, the the angrier you might get, or the sadder you might get. When they say ignorance is a bliss.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not. In this case, it's not, because we can't move forward if we don't know the roots of our problems and if we don't know what we're dealing with. And a lot of time when I deal with women, especially in Bahrain, they always tell me, "Oh, we've got it good." Even though we have a huge gender gap in terms of employment. I say this many, many times and I'll keep saying it, but we only represent 19% of employees in Bahrain.
Yeah.
80% is male dominated.
Wow. That's a
And
lot.
yeah, and even though we do represent the majority of management in industries like finance, we're still a minority more or less. So I just think it's about being realistic about what's going on instead of being like, oh, we've got it good, because we don't want to admit that we've got it bad. We have to
Yeah.
understand that we're not as like we're not there yet, and that's not what a lot of women want to accept. They want to believe that they're equal because the reality is way too harsh on them. So in order to understand discrimination, you have to listen to people who talk about it, because when I talk, a lot of people don't dismiss me, and then read about it and just understand what's going on around you by observe very closely. You'll see it crystal clear.
Something interesting you said is that you've actually realized that you were discriminated because you had two brothers. I remember, are you two sisters and two brothers? And I just want to know how you lived it at home.
For me, I just saw that like my brothers were being heard more than I was.
Yeah.
I voiced that to my family too. Like, like I need to be heard too. I need my opinions to be heard. And it took a while for that to happen. Eventually it happened, but I had to work for it. Whereas my brothers, they got it by default, just by being men. I felt like they were very condescending with me. Like I was always told that I don't know any better.
I never really lived in a household where I had a brother, so I didn't really notice this issue. So I wanted to ask you, do you think that a big portion of this issue, or where men are very, blind to this idea, is because of their parents? Like, mothers, even though they're women, they still didn't educate their sons to literally treat women pretty much equally.
So, in my opinion, it's up to the women to change the environment around them. So,
Yeah. Mm.
women can raise their sons better, and they can raise their daughters to be independent. So, like for example, I know you grew up in a household where you were able to move out of the house. This is kind of
Yeah.
unheard for in Bahrain, like a woman being able to move out of the house because it's a small country, like that
Yeah.
acts as a small city. It's very like radical and crazy for a woman to be able to move out. So even when you told me that, that blew my mind. I was like, wow, you can do that in Morocco.
Wow.
That's so cool. It's very
Yeah, we're
westernized and
cool.
cool.
I think, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's honestly not 100% general, but it's not taboo, or it's not heard of. A lot of people move out very young to pursue their studies.
Well, the thing is, I know women have done it, but not in a very like in your face. I'm moving out and moving to an apartment on my own kind of way. A lot of times women just end up studying abroad and then finding a job, and that's a lot more accepted than just like, oh, I'm just like moving out of the house while I'm still a student. You know what I mean? Like while
Yeah,
you're still in the
totally.
country. So
Yeah.
for me, finding any opportunity abroad, like finding any opportunity outside Bahrain and being like, oh, I'm just like outside of Bahrain pursuing this specific kind of opportunity, it helps with my situation because that makes it a lot less radical than, oh, I'm moving out for the rest of my life, I'm not coming back. It's not easy because it's such a traditional thing for the daughters and the women to be with their family, so much that my family is not used to just me being away from them and them not supporting me financially. That sometimes they're just like, if you need anything, we're here. You want money, we'll send you money. It's just like they're freaking out.
Parental instinct.
Yeah, so they're still kind of freaked out, but it's all about, like I said, it's all about us
Mm.
changing the status quo, just being like, it's okay, it's normal, it's not a bad thing if I want to live on my own. It's just us taking that action and just doing something different. It's a brave thing to do. I'll have to admit it. That's not easy. Like, it took a lot of courage and a lot of determination from me to be able to do that. But it's just all about going back to my first point, knowing what you want, knowing what you're comfortable with, and not compromising with that.
Since you talked about Morocco and about how different we are, I just wanted to know, like, the first time we met, what kind of impression did you have on me? Like, what kind of impression do you have of Morocco? You know, seeing like a girl, someone who's 23 or 21 from Morocco. What did you expect? Like, what kind of impression do you have?
So you and I were in the same team, right? I think we were like the blue team or something.
Yeah.
And I remember, I'm like not 100% extroverted. Like, I'm not a person that puts herself out there all the time. Like, I can be sometimes, but not all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes me sometimes time to warm up to people. But you, I remember Dr. Tracy was like, okay, who's going to be the leader for the group today for like this kind of, I don't know, we were going around Washington and she was introducing us to stuff, and you stepped in and you were like, I'll do it. And I was like, wow, this girl is putting herself out there. So, like, my first impression about you was that you're confident, but I don't remember associating you to your country, because I don't remember even realizing that you were from Morocco. I was just like, oh, I just like took an impression about you that you were confident. And then I noticed how like workaholic you were. You were always on your like laptop, but I admired that. I was like, wow, this girl, like, when I would see you like, focused and on your laptop and stuff, I was always like, man, this girl is so focused and she's working. And I'm like, okay. And then like I would be like, oh yeah, it's good, it's good. She's young, she should be working. I'm like, it's okay. And we're like, some people work, some people don't. You don't like, it's because I get the urge to work when I see someone work. I'm like, you don't have to work, it's okay. So I was just like, you would inspire me, but at the same time I'm like, okay, no, take it easy, because like I've been taking it easy for a couple of years.
Yeah, like completely get you. I was at that time in 2017. I was working on the startup, so
Yeah.
I was trying to like get work done and at the same time, be part of the program and be, involved and not give up on my startup at the same time. But
Yeah.
if you honestly, like, I actually knew you were from Bahrain, and my first impression was I have no
Yeah.
idea what the difference between Bahrain, Saudi Arabia is in terms
Yeah.
of culture, and I think that's something you guys struggle with when you people ask you where you're from, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, people think Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, we're more or less, we are the same. So I don't want to deny that. We're not the same, but Saudi Arabia is such an extreme religious country that in Bahrain we're so much more open-minded that when someone is like, oh, so it's the same as Saudi Arabia, we're like, no, 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 no. The women are much better doing what they do. Like, I'm like, as much as I criticize Bahrain, and I hate to say that, but we do have it better than Saudi Arabia. Like, legally, there's way more things that's on our side, but like, there's a lot of similarities too. But Bahrain, because like I said earlier, we're diverse, we're multicultural. Locals tend to be a little bit more open-minded and a little bit more lenient
Yeah.
than Saudis. Like, for me, when I go to the airport and I'm a female traveling on my own, no one ever questions that. No one ever is like, what are you doing traveling on your own? Does your parents know? What are you like? No one ever say that. And I look really young. Like, I'm 26, but I look 21.
I actually learned so much about Bahrain from you.
Yeah.
And that's really cool. And I think a lot of people should, you know, actually go and read more about Bahrain and Middle East and actually figure out there's a lot of differences,
Yeah.
even though we're all Arabs, which is kind of cool. I have one last
Yeah.
question for you, Noor. The best advice you've ever been given, and how's that changed a situation in your life, and why?
So I really like what you just said, that when you met me in Zahra, the way that you think about Bahrain changed. And
Yeah.
that's the best advice that someone gave me, was like, when I was like, Bahrain Polytechnic changed me and like changed my character on so many levels. Was not just because of the degree and the education and everything. It was also because of the instructors and the tutors that were there, who made a huge impact on my character and personality and gave me so much more confidence. And they didn't directly give me that advice, but they did advise me to travel around and like see the world. And they would always say, like, there's way more to the world than Bahrain, because a lot of people they have the means. A lot of people my age, they have the means to travel and see the world, but they end up just settling down and getting married and not exploring the world, and then they realize it at like an older age. So I was told like to get out of the country and to see the world, and I traveled a lot more than anyone maybe my age in Bahrain. Like I went to so many countries in the past 3 years, and I was able to travel as much as I could, and that really opened my mind. It really made me understand cultures, and it gave me a lot of well-roundedness. So this is what I would tell people: just travel, put yourself out there, just see the world, because that makes you understand people better, have more empathy, and just understand how to deal with people. That initially helps you with your career.
Yeah. Well, I completely agree with you, but just for our listeners, though, do not travel right now because it's a pandemic. Stay home and travel after. Yeah?
Yeah, when this pandemic ends, start traveling. When now, just stay home. Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Noor, for joining me today.
Thank you for doing this. I had so much fun.
For our listeners, you can leave us your feedback on everything we've said on this first episode and stay tuned for the next one.